Life's too short to drive boring cars. So there's many car reviewers out there that talk about all the great features of these new vehicles, or they might even talk about used vehicles to a certain perspective, but few can provide the insight that I'm going to offer you on this BMW E70 X535D that has almost 230,000 kilometers or 130,000 miles. I have owned this vehicle for 10 years, and I bought the vehicle with 50,000 kilometers and it was 3 years of age. And what we have here is a culmination, or essentially a summary of what that looks like. There's been lots of great times, there's been lots of tough times, and there's been lots of repairs and fun and frivolity. But what I am going to share with you is my previous 10 years experience of owning this BMW E70 X535D. Let's get into it now. First of all, it's never had the luxury of being inside the garage. Second of all, the big thing with this vehicle, of course, is the fact that we live in Canada and northern climate. We're living in the prairies. As you can see, there's lots of snow on the ground. So what does that mean? Cold temperatures. I can truly say that the conditions that this vehicle has been subjected to are harsh. I mean, if you live from California or you live in Florida, maybe even central states, for example, Utah, maybe even across a lot of Europe, the conditions likely will not be as rough and tough as they are here in Canada in the prairies. So this is literally the worst case scenario. And let's start with talking about how this vehicle structurally holds up. What are the cosmetics like today? How does the vehicle, the paint, the bodywork, the plastics, the interior, what is all of that like, and how is it held up over this long duration? We'll talk about that first, and then we're going to talk about what the mechanical situation's like and what have I put into dollars and cents, and I'll share that with you guys, my overall cost of ownership for the last 10 years of this vehicle. And for most of you who have been watching, you'll know that I recently spent a significant amount of money just making some substantial repairs. So I want to share all of those dollars and cents and the mechanical failure points of these BMWs. But first, let's talk about the cosmetics and how this vehicle's held up. How is that beautiful X5 hold up over many, many years of use? Well, first of all, headlights, they get a little milky. Sometimes you need to polish them up a little bit, take your lens cleaner to them, and then you make them bright and shiny again. So that's been a wear and tear item. Here, unfortunately, when we bought the vehicle, it didn't have any expel or paint protection film on it. So as you can see, if you look up close, it has its share of little rocks and chips and dings and what have you. There's all kinds of little rock marks because of the rocks and the pebbles that come off the road to damage the vehicle. But because what we have here is a lot of plastic on the lower bumper section, it actually holds up very, very well. And if I could honestly say, this is probably the best way to equip an SUV. Of course, we also have all this Fender Guard here, and as a result of that, the whole lower body section does well. Now this section here, we have this rocker guard or running boards here that actually does a great job of keeping a lot of the splatter from the wheels from hitting the side of the vehicle. So as a result, all the body panels hold up quite well. Door handles always held up well. None of them have ever broken. Sunroof has always worked, has never come off of the rails, and has been as solid as a rock. Come around to the back of the vehicle, it's done very, very well, although I will comment that closing this lower section has resulted in a dent, as you can see right there. Because it's aluminum, it's actually dented there. I put my knee there to close this once, and it resulted in a dent, a little bit on the flimsy side. And here, this light, this actually is controlled by a module, and we're told that this is a bit of a pricey piece, so those tend to burn out. Not so much the regular lights themselves, but those intersections right here. Watch out for those panels. Sometimes one side may not work or the other side might. Like, you can actually see moisture in there. That's not uncommon failure point. Typical wear items like this, you can see the sun taking a beating on there, and as a result, parts are missing or definitely just show their age, but generally hold up well. And also worth noting, because these vehicles here, there's much aluminum on them, you'll notice there's no rust on these vehicles. There's no rust anywhere. No rust to speak of on any of this BMW X5. These panels are sturdy and they hold up very, very well. And if I can honestly tell you, if there's one brand or one manufacturer that resists rust better than any other manufacturer, it's probably BMW. We've owned 5 BMWs to date, and only did our earliest versions, the E36, start to pump out a tiny bit of rust at the rear fenders. But that was a vehicle that was over 2 decades old when it started to show a little bit of rust. These BMWs do hold up very well and do resist rust very, very well. So this vehicle is no different. You do not see an ounce of rust anywhere. And for a 2009 model year, that is an exceptionally great thing, especially considering they throw salt and sand all over the roads here. Most vehicles in this climate tend to rust. But how's the inside holding up? Well, what I would say is typical BMW of this generation, you'll find you get some of this trim that peels away. This is not an uncommon issue for vehicles of this era. This is very typical. It starts to bubble and then it starts to peel away. As you can see what's happening right there. This is not uncommon for sure. Now the rest of it actually holds up very, very well. The plastics are well made. They're solid, they're durable, there's no cracking on the dash, and the quality of the materials looks very, very good and well above many other manufacturers. Here we have this wood trim, beautiful look in these vehicles, but as you can see, we've noticed some cracking on the wood there, but that's not uncommon for vehicles of this age and generation. And all the controls and knobs and buttons have held up very, very well over the years. Nothing's ever come off, nothing's ever come apart. Everything still works. This slides very, very well and smoothly. Of course, you'll notice more cracks here, but the knobs and buttons and all the controls have held up very well over the years. We can open this up. This all works very, very well. Here we have the little screen, infotainment system for the little hooligans in the back. That is fine and functioning. But here you'll notice typical, again, we have this wear and tear on the handle. Looks kind of disgusting, but this is what you'll find happens with some of these soft touch finishing in some of these BMWs, and this one's no different. Other than that, the aluminum trim looks very, very nice, as does the wood finishing. Everything's holding up very well. The only other thing to comment are the wheels. As you can see, you get some peeling and pitting going on this cover. This is your center cap. It's starting to peel away, but that's not uncommon given this is exposed to heavy amounts of salt and corrosion. The rims themselves have done very, very well. They really do resist curb surfing because the style of the wheels and the fact that you've got a heavy sidewall means that you rarely ever curb surf these rims, and they generally hold up very, very well over time. So most of the structural components of these vehicles tend to hold very well, and they have for me as well. But you know, there's been a few things. You get these random pieces of plastic like these. I don't know where they show up from, but they just sort of randomly show up and you find them under a seat or on the floor somewhere. Don't know what that's all about. There's another problem that you find structurally with these vehicles, and it has to do with the pass-through bag right there. Right there you have this bag, and this is meant to push skis through. So when you push these seats down, you're able to run some skis right through. So if you have longer items, maybe hockey sticks or skis that you want to run through the seats, you can do that. There's that bag. But the problem is you've got this door and it doesn't always latch. There's these little latches in here. There's two little releases and it's junk, and it doesn't always, like, they just start coming apart. You'll see there's a little latch there, a hook. But these pieces that come off, there's little parts that are missing here all the time. They pop off or they break, and then this no longer locks into place. And quite honestly, that's annoying more than anything. For me, once a vehicle rusts, you might as well just chuck it in the garbage because it's kind of done and it's gone. But you don't want to throw this in the garbage because the body is holding up very well, so it makes you want to keep putting money into it. Unfortunately, that's where you're into the diminishing returns. And the other thing gets very frustrating. Of course, we look at the rear brakes, and we'll talk about the mechanics now. Let's dive right in to the conversation of the things that I've experienced that have gone wrong with this vehicle, or the things that I've learned in the last 10 years. And the worst part is, when the dealers get their hands on it, for the most part, I would say they do a pretty good job of diagnosing what the issue is, get to the bottom of the problem, and fix the part, and send you the bill. And of course, usually quite substantial. But it's not just about that. Sometimes I've had dealers say, and I've had a situation on that rear brakes with the electric controls, when you pull the lever, it activates the brakes. It's an electric brake system for the park. That's great, perfect, right? Until it doesn't work properly. Every once in a while, we've had this nagging fault. Bing, you hear this cute little light on the dash pops up. It's the yellow brake light, and that represents a brake light control module fault. Don't know what it is. The dealers couldn't really figure it out. They said, we'll inspect the rear brake assembly. They charged me a bunch of money for an inspection, and they still couldn't confirm definitively whether it was a module problem or some other issue. They just said, well, maybe we'll change the module. Hopefully that fixes it. If it fixes it, we're good. If it's not, we'll have to keep going. And that's all well and good, except that the module was close to $1,000. I'm not going to start throwing money on a whim, you know, but that's unfortunately where sometimes we've been snookered. So since we're talking about mechanics, let's look at what we're dealing with at the rear. You've got a conventional suspension on the front, but it's the rear where it gets interesting. On the E70 X5, there's a 35D, as you see right there, the 35D. This vehicle has third row seating, and with the third row seating, you get the optional rear air self-leveling suspension. Sounds all great, right? And it is when it's working. And what's happened here, 3 times now I've had failures. There's a set of airbags in there, down in this area. You can't see them from here, but looking through there, Now I have some coil springs I've retrofitted because I got tired of changing the airbags. Now what there is an air compressor, and when this levels down, the air compressor senses the level and it starts injecting air and pumps it up, and it keeps the level on the vehicle. Now it's great when it's working, and it's generally pretty reliable, but what my personal experience with the original airbags lasted about 7 years, then the second set of airbags lasted about 2.5 years, and so I decided on the third set, I said the heck with it, I was just going to change and put some springs because I just got tired of putting these damn airbags in. You get out in the morning and you find the car's ass sitting on the ground. That's the signal number one that your airbags are leaking down, because that's usually what it means. They're losing air. There's a hole, there's a damage to the airbag, and then finally, of course, it dissipates the air overnight, and if the vehicle's not running, the air compressor's not going to feed that, and it's just going to sit on the ground. That has been a common problem on these vehicles, and honestly, can certainly do without. Now, unfortunately, there's a few parts that can go on this air suspension. Other than the air lines, you've got the rear airbags. There's one on either side. There's an accumulator, level switch. Of course, you've got an air compressor and all the electrics that go with that. So there's multiple parts that can fail with that, and any one of them is going to cost you some money. So the airbags cost me about $500 aftermarket for a pair. To get the whole thing done at the dealer, if you're going to pay the dealer to do your rear airbags, you're going to spend over $2,000. It's absolutely ludicrous. But that's a common failure point. Let's get into another one. And the next issue. Let's open the door. Right in there, we have another common problem. I've created videos on this very matter, and it's the heater fan system down under the dash. Now, of course, here you've got the fan speed control right there. You'll notice the little fan to the big fan, and that's all well and good until it stops working. And the fan assembly is down under here. You'll actually get the motor and the resistor, and it's tucked underneath this panel here. You get to unbolt that, and then you get to work under the dashboard, and it's a very difficult, tight area to work. I've now had to change a complete assembly, but before that I just did a resistor, which only lasted about 1.5 years. And to get the dealer to do that, it's a significant amount of money. But I bought the fan blower as well as a resistor all in one assembly for about $500, and I spent an afternoon in the shop of my own. Now, I warn you, don't do it in cold weather because you can break the squirrel cage, and then you're into a heap of more troubles and hassles. So it's a bit of an awkward thing to work on. Do it in warmer weather in a warm shop. But again, it's going to cost you a few bucks, and it's a guaranteed known issue with these vehicles. And the next bunch of issues are under the hood. Let's take a look. Pop this up. And there's a bunch of problems that I've experienced under here. Firstly, I've had some vacuum leaks. That's costed me several $100s. Took the vehicle to the shop. They had to put the smoke machine to it and do some troubleshooting diagnostics because it spit out an engine light. And they did get to the bottom of it. There was a vacuum line that was cut and slightly abraded, and of course they had to replace that. Not a huge expense, but it can become a diagnostic nightmare. Because this is a diesel as well, this is another problem. I've had glow plugs. That's the preheat system. Of course, when you press the start button, the vehicle senses the temperature, humidity, and it applies the appropriate amount of preheat to the engine. In case you didn't know, diesels require a bit of preheat to help in the compression. Now, it's those glow plugs, and there's one per cylinder. They cost a significant amount of money to get them done. I'd personally get the dealer to do it because there's actually tricks in removal, and if you don't do them right, you can actually break off part within the cylinder, and then it becomes a bigger nightmare. Either way, I've had glow plugs fail on this vehicle as well. And more problems are the Egr valve and the Egr valve cooler. Down in here, you'll notice the cooler is that tin, and those have been known to crack and split. If they do, that's a problem. As well as the Egr valve, that's been a problem. I have replaced that myself. Slightly awkward repair, but it's doable for the home do-it-yourself or mechanic for sure. Also gives you an opportunity to clean out some of the carbon that's starting to build up in the recirculation valve assembly. But it is diesel. It makes soot and carbon. That's what you're going to get. But before I share my most controversial failure of this vehicle that I've experienced in 10 years, I want to talk in general. We've done many, many long trips. Of course, this vehicle has had a varied amount of use. We've driven it to California and Phoenix and Vegas. All over the US, we've done long distance highway trips. You're able to get 600 to almost 700 miles on a tank of fuel if you run it end to end. So it does very well, probably over 30 miles per gallon. And the other thing I'll mention, this has the wonderful ZF Auto transmission, shifts flawlessly, works every time, and has been an absolute bulletproof piece. The other thing is the core engine in these vehicles is the turbo 6-cylinder diesel engine in these is absolutely bulletproof too. It's not the engine that you're finding as many problems with as it is all of the emissions crap tied to it. For example, the DPF, the diesel particulate filter, the Egr valve, the diesel exhaust fluid, active tank there with heater and temperature sensing element, as well as the passive tank that's located in the back. It's all of that emissions equipment that brings this vehicle down. The core engine is great, has barely ever used an ounce of oil between oil changes. We've never had to top it up. But let's talk about some of the controversial issues. Now where I start getting heated is the diesel exhaust fluid tank, and that's tucked in front of that front wheel here on the passenger side. Right here, you'll notice you actually have to peel away this fender liner right here, and it's tucked under there. There's a tank, and it's a diesel exhaust fluid tank. And if you cycle up here, you'll notice this is the filler for that. So there's an active diesel exhaust fluid tank reservoir right there, and there's a second one over here. There's another filler here, and these two both essentially fill up the active tank, which consists of a built-in heater element, a temperature sensor, and other miscellaneous components which tie and inject that diesel exhaust fluid into the exhaust system. There's also a passive tank that's on the other side, on the driver's side, down below. And that's essentially how you fill this system up. Now, that's all well and good when you live in Florida or California. But here in Canada, we see extreme temperatures. We actually had almost minus 40 degrees this winter on a few days in a row. And that's not uncommon. Every time we hit that minus 35, minus 40, this vehicle starts to suffer some problems. Number one is the battery starts to get weak because the battery needs the preheat system to activate even more intensely, as well as because it's a diesel higher compression, it needs the battery cranking power. And on top of it, it uses the battery for not just the options and extra features that you find in a BMW X5, but also the diesel exhaust fluid has a heater, and it uses that. So the system just drains the vehicle down drastically. And the X5 has had a lot of problems with replacing batteries every 3 or 4 years, and of course the diesel exhaust fluid tank. That's where the controversy is, the DEF tank. Why do I say that? Well, as a matter of fact, BMW said and extended a service bulletin through a TSB that owners of these vehicles are to experience an extended warranty up to 10 years or 120,000 miles to replace the original tank because it was a known failure point. They wouldn't extend a warranty out like that if they didn't know there was an issue. They were forced by that. Their hand was forced to support customers with this issue. But unfortunately, not only did we get one replaced under the warranty, because we had first one, a diesel exhaust fluid tank replaced at 160,000 kilometers, and the vehicle was just coming up on 10 years. They did one under that extended warranty. We just had another one fail just 2.5 years later. Bingo, another one blew. And this time, no warranty. You know what that cost? $3,500 parts and labor to get that installed. Clearly a deficient part by BMW, and they're not taking the accountability or the responsibility of replacing that for customers who are experiencing these issues. It's a sad, sad state of affairs. I get it. They don't necessarily need to keep replacing parts over and over, but it's clearly a deficient part and not one that doesn't come out with a significant cost. So recently, again, I had to replace that tank, and even if you want to do the replacement yourself, the part itself is going to cost over $2,500 Canadian, and then that's if you want to tackle that job yourself. The other thing that we just recently had was this. So then we take this off, and I'm going to show you what else we had to do. The fuel injectors, once you remove the air box, the intake plumbing, and all this foam, then you're able to see not just the EGR and all the other hardware, but take a look under here. And now what we're looking at here is a fuel rail. You have a common fuel rail, and you'll see this light little hose right there. That is essentially feeding the fuel to one of the injectors. Now there's 6 injectors. There's 6 cylinders, 6 glow plugs, and 6 fuel injectors. And we just happen to have one of the fuel injectors failed, number 5. So it goes from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And guess what? It's actually commonly known that often the fuel injectors number 4, 5, and 6, so the back 3 often fail, and they often fail in spurts. So we replaced number 5 because that's one was actually shorting out the driver board. The DDE board is what drives these fuel injectors. And what was happening is number 5 injector was faulting out. It was shorting and it was killing the board. And because of that, it was stalling the vehicle. The vehicle would no longer, it would fall, it would protect itself and isolate the back bank, and then of course the vehicle wouldn't run. So once we replaced injector number 5 on the back end, then all was good. That's great, right? Well, what's not so great is they're piezoelectric injectors, and unfortunately at about $1,900 parts and labor per injector, you don't just start replacing them all just on a whim. And after reading a little bit online, as well as I consulted, I talked to the mechanic himself, as well as reached out to other third-party or independent shops, and they all more or less say the same thing, and that is, sadly, because of this cowl design, what often tends to happen is, if you have bad seals, water can migrate down, and what happens is those back three injectors, number 4, 5, and 6, are subjected to moisture, and if they get moisture on them or they get water on the injectors, they start to short out. So often what you're going to see is, if you have one injector fail, you often see maybe the other 2 injectors fail. It's the back 3 that quite frequently do fail altogether. Repairs can be expensive. There are weaknesses with this vehicle. You just need to be aware of them. But let's look at a few of the bills that I've had, and then I'll give the overall tally of how much this vehicle has cost me over the last 10 years of ownership. That's the most recent one with the injector and the DEF tank, $5,300. We have $1,100. We have another $1,150. We have another $1,600. We have another $240. We have another $375. We have another $250. And so you're starting to see the picture here, right? The only time this vehicle comes out of the service shop for less than $1,000 is for your basic oil service. Pretty much any repair beyond an oil service is going to cost you in excess of $1,000. To get that battery changed recently, we paid $1,200. All it was a battery change and an engine shampoo just to diagnose a leak that we thought we had, which turns out we didn't. But you must understand that this vehicle is not cheap to fix. And so over the course of the last 10 years, I've accumulated all the bills. Oil service every year, 1 or 2 oil services every year. The brakes, we've done a couple brake jobs. We've done a few sets of tires, plus all the repairs that I've spoke of. This vehicle has literally cost us about $16,000 in a 10-year time frame. So if you want to break that out to an average, we're talking about $1,600 per year of maintenance and repairs for this vehicle. Now, do you think that's excessive? The recent repairs that start to worry me. You know, we got into the conversation about having a bad injector, and unfortunately the dealer said we can't guarantee we don't have a problematic DDE board failure as well. They couldn't diagnose that. They said not until we put a new injector can we actually say we do not have a board issue. And the problem is, what had me really worrying was I was already committed to the diesel exhaust fluid tank for $3,800. Then along comes the injector for another $1,900. Then the dealer's telling me I might actually have to ante up for a new board if the injector didn't fix the problem. So now I'm already at almost $6,000 plus a board. The board costs about $2,700 just for the part, plus labor, you're another $3,000 or $4,000. Now we're talking about potentially a $10,000 repair. And it was just all hinging on the fact that that board was either cooked or not. And I was a little worried because the dealer couldn't definitively give me an answer on the diagnosis of the board. Now, I even talked to the mechanic themselves. I personally recommended, why don't you put a fixed resistor on the output of that driver board and simulate an injector and see if the car comes alive? Because as soon as he isolated the bad injector, it would run again. It wouldn't run when the injector was connected. But at the end of the day, pricey car to fix, pricey car to maintain, at about $250 for an oil change and $1,000 for a battery with labor and parts. It's not the kind of vehicle you want to hand down to your parents or hand down to your child who's essentially a starving student. You definitely have to have a significant bankroll or a strong do-it-yourself sense and a great selection of tools and diagnostic equipment. So if you're shopping for an E70 X5 35D and you're not sure what actually does go wrong, trust me, that's what goes wrong, and I hope I helped you with that today. And with all of that said, I'm sure you enjoyed the video, and if you just want to learn a little bit more why used BMWs are so cheap, definitely check out that video. It's going to share the whole summary and the background for you. Hope to see you guys real soon. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.